All right, so as a church, we are spending the summer working our way through the Sermon on the Mount. We're in Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to do Matthew chapter 6 a little bit differently than we've done Matthew chapter 5. That one, Matthew 5, we just did verse by verse and went our way through it. Matthew chapter 6, if you're here last week, you heard me say this, we're going to divide it around different topics. So we're going to do last week and this week about money, then we're going to do 3 weeks on prayer, then we're going to talk about forgiveness, fasting, and kind of do it that way. A little bit different organization than what Jesus uses, but it's going to help us consider kind of one topic at a time. Always helpful for you to know kind of where we're going. I always feel like that's particularly the case when we're talking about money, which is obviously a big part of what this passage addresses, that, this didn't come out of a staff meeting this week where we're like, oh man, we need to have a quick impromptu fundraiser. Ooh, I know, go preach on money. We're just trying to take the text as it comes to us, and this is where we find ourselves for today. So last week, if you were here, you remember, I stood up here with a little mason jar of coins to talk about the difference between giving selfishly for our own purposes and giving unselfishly to be generous for the sake of the world. It's obviously been a good week because this week I am back not with a mason jar of coins, but with a $10 bill. Not trying to be all blingy and show-offy with the 10. I just needed cash for this illustration, and this is the smallest denomination they had at the ATM. So I went out and got my little $10, and I'm ready to preach. Because over the course of this week, I was reminded of something that I probably learned in like second grade or third grade, but truly had forgotten about for a while. And as soon as I say it, you're like, oh yeah, of course, I totally know this. But you know that on the back of every piece of American currency, it says, "In God we trust." Right? I mean, this is like third grade social studies, but I hadn't thought about that in a while. And I had a moment this week where I was like, wow, that feels quaint. That feels borderline surprising. That feels a tiny bit shocking, right? On my more cynical moments, I was like, I wonder how long that's going to last. But it truly, on the back of every bill in your wallet, it says, "In God we trust." And there's actually something like really beautiful about that. And there's something really encouraging about that. There's something really spiritually helpful for us as followers of God that the nice people at the U.S. Treasury wanted to help you remember what Jesus is teaching in Matthew chapter 6. So if you work at the Treasury, thank you very much. Keep it up. That's fantastic. However, there's also a part of me that's like, I wonder how much of our problem as believers is illustrated with this reality. Because I wonder at the end of the day, do we really trust God, or is our trust actually in money, but we have no problem putting like a little Jesus bumper sticker on the backside of the thing that we actually put our trust in? Right? And I think the real problem for those of us who are followers of Jesus is we want to have it both ways, right? We want to say that, of course, our deepest allegiance is to God. Of course, our greatest love is for God. Jesus died for us. Money's never going to die for us. Of course, that's where our deepest devotion goes. But then we tend to live our lives like all of our hope and all of our trust is actually in money. And part of what Jesus is trying to do in this passage is say, no, it really can't work that way. It's not a both and kind of situation. This really is an either or kind of thing. We're going to have to figure out what we want to build our lives off of. And he's offering a contrast today. He says, do you want to build your life off serving God, or do you want to build your life off serving money? And the problem is that we have gotten tragically good at domesticating this passage. And we just kind of reduce it to a few cautionary notes that don't really require us to ask very difficult questions of ourselves. Because at face value, we just kind of go cruising through the passage and we're like, okay, look, I get it. Number one, don't love your stuff too much, which is true and definitely in the passage. Number two, be generous. Like at the very least, it seems like it'll be worth it when you get to heaven. It's like the ultimate deferred compensation plan or something like that. Number three, make sure you love God more than you love money. It doesn't really have to cause us to wrestle with how you would measure love for God or love for money, but we just say, as long as God's number one, you're going to be just fine. And all of that is good and true, but by now we've been through the Sermon on the Mount enough to know that Jesus isn't going to let us off the hook quite that easily. Right? Jesus is not going to let us take a couple of little financial platitudes and not ask some serious questions about our lives and the way that we're living. Jesus' goal here is not so much to be our little financial planner. He's not playing Dave Ramsey or Ramit Sethi here. He's getting us to think about the way that our money is impacting our soul, but he is doing it in a way that is designed to sound an alarm. Right? This is Jesus warning us. Right? That's the way we need to read this passage. We need to read it as a warning about the thing that is most likely to distract us from experiencing the kingdom of God here on earth and maybe in eternity as well. He's warning us about what is the most seductive evil in our world today. Right? And I truly believe this is the thing that is most likely to lead us astray from experiencing the fullness of the kingdom of God here on earth. Right? This is not a detached text that we just need to consider in general. This is one that we got to run right through the filter of our lives and see how this is playing out in our souls, because Jesus wants to warn us not just of the danger of money, but the danger of what he calls mammon, right? Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, John Michael read it the way the CSB translates it, which is the way that every translation of Scripture has done it since the King James Version. So it's not that the CSB lets us down, it's just that we're having interpretive difficulty in the church with Matthew 6:24, which says in your translation, you cannot serve both God and money. The problem with that is that the Greek word there for money is mammon. But the problem with what I just said is that mammon is not a Greek word. Mammon is an Aramaic word, which was kind of the language of the day. Now, if you've been around the Bible for a long time, you know that the majority of the New Testament is written in Greek. Yet, as Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount, and as Matthew records it, and as Luke records it, they make the decision not to translate Mammon, Aramaic, into any of its Greek equivalents. And there were several that they could have chosen from. But they just leave Mammon in there as it is. They leave Mammon in there as this untranslated word. And whenever you see the Bible do something like that, you need to slow down and ask the question, why? Right? And I think the best explanation for why it is that the Sermon on the Mount doesn't translate the word mammon comes from an author named Andy Crouch, who writes this in his book, The Life We're Looking For. Mammon is not simply money, but the anti-God impetus that finds its power in money. Mammon is ultimately not at all just a thing, nor even a system, but a will at work in history, right? So don't just think about your paycheck or the equity that you have in your house or your 401k balance. It would be more accurate to think about the power that wants to use your paycheck, that wants to use the equity in your house, that wants to use your 401k, that wants to earn the wealth that you have, that wants to use whatever wealth you have to separate you from God. Right? There are some people that will say that Mammon was actually a pagan deity. The evidence for that is actually really thin. It was just more this understanding that somehow our stuff conspires to lead us away from God. Now, I understand to say that in 21st century America sounds incredibly scandalous and almost sounds blasphemous to say that in our culture, right? Because we live in a world that is built on mammon. And Jesus wants us to be a little uncomfortable with that because he's convinced that the world as it is will totally suck the life out of our souls. And he wants to free us up to experience something infinitely better than our materialistic, consumer-driven, greed-oriented, he who dies with the most toys wins kind of world. And Jesus is saying that world is so seductive that I need to grab your attention and I need you to see the danger because I need you to be really serious about running away from it. Because let's be clear, what Jesus is trying to say is that both the world of mammon and God both want your ultimate allegiance. And you're going to have to pick who gets it. And in order to experience the fullness of the kingdom of heaven here on earth and maybe in eternity as well, we need to break the power of mammon over our lives. So we're going to talk about the resources that God has entrusted to us today, which is always uncomfortable, right? It's easier to preach about sex in the American church than it is to preach about money, because to talk about money feels like we've gotten really close to home. And I apologize, it's not really my goal this morning to disturb you, or at least it's not my goal to disturb you any more than the text wants to disturb you. Right? I'm not trying to go any further than Jesus is trying to go, but we do need to see why it is that mammon ends up having so much power over our lives. Right? And what makes mammon so deadly, what makes mammon so dangerous to us is that we willingly give mammon power over our lives. It's not like it has to take it by force. We offer it up because we absolutely love the things that mammon offers us. Right? We find what mammon offers us to be downright irresistible. Because this world of mammon offers us two primary things. Number one, it offers us a life of ease. Right? It has been rightly been said that money can't buy happiness, and that's true. But let's just have the courage to be honest with each other for a little bit. Money can make your life a heck of a lot easier. Right? Like, if you don't believe me, just go on the Beltway in rush hour. You got to do this on the Virginia side because Maryland hasn't quite gotten here yet. But on the Virginia side, there's hot lanes. Right? And those hot lanes offer you a choice. You can go sit in traffic with everybody else over here, or for $23.60, you can get on these lanes and go 65 miles an hour. Now, here's the great thing. If you have kids, they're in the car, welcome the Flex Pass, and you get to go for free. Right? We're like, God bless you people right now. Like, this is the only time in human history that children save you money. It's amazing. You jump in and you go for free. But other than that, if you can't get three people in the car, you got to choose. You want to sit in traffic and hate your life, or for $23.60, you can get out of it. Right? And the examples are just limitless. I remember in my 20s, at a time when I was traveling more than I do now, certainly than I do now with kids in a pandemic and all that kind of stuff. I remember meeting a guy who told me that one of his life hacks was he valeted his car at Dulles Airport. And I was like, oh, shut up. I did not even know that is an option. I've been totally content parking in the economy lot, but now that I know that's an option, I desperately want to valet my car at Dulles. Now, just because you all give to the church and that's where my income comes, be assured I don't do that. But I'm going to tell you, I want to do that, right? Because if you told me I had to fly to LA this week, I'm like, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about me driving to the economy lot where I have to park, 4 miles away from the nearest shuttle stop and get into the shuttle and do the thing with the luggage where you put your stuff in the car and then you drive to the terminal and wait in insanely long lines and get put in the middle seat and thrown, in the back of the middle seat and coach right by the bathroom before you get yourself to LA and then go spend a week in the Econo Lodge? Because that doesn't sound awesome to me. But if you're offering me a trip where I get to go valet my car, fly first class to LA and stay in the Four Seasons, I'm like, yeah, I'm your guy. I'm in. That is a better trip. And sometimes we feel this obligation of like Christians to be like, I would rather be with Jesus and coach than with the sinners in first class. Well, that's your problem. I would rather be with Jesus in first class. I think that's where he travels, right? My friend Chris Gaynor is a pastor in North Carolina. He tells everybody that he was born to seek luxury. And I'm like, I agree. I feel like I have this genetic predisposition to stay in really great hotels, right? Money is going to make your life easier. Money is going to make your life more comfortable. You can get your coffee at Sheetz or at Swings. One of them is better than the other. I understand, gas station coffee people, you're going to retire like 6 years ahead of the rest of us, and your kids are actually going to go to college. Good for you. But the coffee at Swings is better. And I'm not trying to induce guilt. I wrote this at Swings because the coffee's better, and they have free refills. It tastes better. Your life is easier if you have money. Mammon is like, hey, if you just earn a little bit more, imagine how much simpler, imagine how much easier. And if that doesn't do it for you, Mammon's second offer will. Mammon offers us control. Mammon offers us security. 2,000 years ago, Jesus sat on a hillside and he told his followers, verse 20, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves break in and steal. And it seems like we've spent the last 2,000 years saying, hey, Jesus, good point. Treasure here on earth does have a tendency to deteriorate. Treasure here on earth does have a tendency to get stolen. So let's make it our ambition to make our earthly treasure as safe as possible. Right? And Jesus, we're like, oh, fair point. Thanks for the warning. Good tip. In Jesus' day and age, everybody kept their money at home. And we're like, well, that's not safe. Let's invent banks. We'll just keep it there. But then even then, banks get robbed, so let's invent the FDIC to make sure that everything you put in the bank is insured. And while we're insuring things, let's just go ahead and insure everything from our health to our teeth to our cars to our lives to umbrella policies that we don't even know what they insure, but people tell us we're supposed to have them. Let's go ahead and get retirement plans. Let's go ahead and have 6 months of savings. Let's go ahead and do all of the things that we're supposed to do. And I'm not opposed to any of that. Like the church gives me and my family health insurance and we're taking it. Like spoiler alert, you're not going to come to the congregational meeting in September and be like, hey, Laura and I have prayed about it and we think we're going to just raise 3 kids without health insurance. Like not happening. I'm pro insurance. That's great. It's good. But we try to do everything in our power to give ourselves a sense of security and control via the wealth we've been able to accumulate. I mean, sure, we will gladly slap "In God We Trust" on the back of it. But at the end of the day, it feels like our trust in God increases in direct proportion to the number of these that we have in our wallet. And the more of these we have, the more we're like, oh yeah, I'm trusting God. But Jesus is like, actually, wouldn't it be the reverse? Wouldn't it be like even when these are not seeming to add up? Wouldn't it be like when you don't seem like you have enough of these that you decide to exercise your trust in me? And we're like, no, I'm sorry, I'm American. That's not how I do it. Like I trust you when I can open up my app and see how much money I have. Mammon says, if you have enough of me, you'll never have to worry again. Mammon says, if you have enough of me, you can be independent. If you have enough of me, you're going to read prayers in the Bible like, give us this day our daily bread, and then sit in a small group and ask questions like, what do you think Jesus meant by that? 2,000 years ago, they're like, he means I don't want my kids to go to bed hungry. And we're like, oh, well, that's an interesting interpretation of the passage. That hadn't occurred to me. See, we don't want to live our lives dependent on God. We want to live our lives confident in our income, confident in our budget, confident that it all adds up and we've got a plan for the next month and the next 5 years, and we've got it all mapped out, and we know how to land in the house and get the kids through college and retirement. We got it all figured out, and nothing can touch our safety, and nothing can touch our security. Nothing can touch the sense of power that we have over other people. We want to get to the point in life where we say, I'm good. I'm comfortable and I'm secure. And the lie is once I get to those places, then I will get serious about living my life in service for God. But you and I know that's a lie, because for everything Mammon offers us, it also sets a deadly trap. Notice in the text, we end up serving Mammon, not the other way around. No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. But to be really clear, you're going to end up serving something. You're going to live your life with an ultimate allegiance to something that's bigger than yourself. Is it going to be God, or is it going to be Mammon? Is it going to be the Creator, or is it going to be his creation? And Mammon hooks us, because all of the things that it offers never quite seem to arrive. Right? It offers us a life of ease, of comfort, and of convenience, but it always feels like it's just out of reach, right? Like, I don't meet many people, regardless of their income, that say, man, I'm just in a season where my life seems to be characterized by ease and comfort and convenience. We just kind of never get there. It's like we never get to fully grab hold of it. Right? And this has confused humans for most of the last 100 years, if not longer. Right? In the 1930s, the famous British economist, John Maynard Keynes, he gave this speech that people quote almost to laugh at right now. But in the 1930s, he gave what has become a famous speech where he predicted that before very long, he didn't put a timestamp on it, but he said before very long, no one in the world was going to have to work more than 15 hours a week. And he brought it up because in the 1930s, he believed that man's chief problem, humanity's chief problem, was about to become how to use our freedom from pressing economic cares. He envisioned that world in the 1930s. I don't know about you, but in 2022, I'm still waiting for that. Doesn't seem like that ship has come in for me. Because whatever standard of living you're able to achieve, it's like the finish line always gets moved just a little bit. As soon as you upgrade the kitchen, you realize that the bathroom is a mess. As soon as you get the car, you start dreaming about a jet ski. As soon as you buy the second home, you are reminded how much you hate the kitchen in the first home that you remodeled 10 years ago, and you have to go off and do that. The more money you have, the more it seems like you're serving someone else's agenda, because you got to keep all the plates spinning in the air, and there's all these commitments, and there's all these things to fund, and we're working harder than ever before, with fewer boundaries than ever before, more depressed than ever before, yet owning more than ever before. And in that world, Mammon goes, I know, that really does suck, doesn't it? If you just had 10,000 more a year, though, you'd be great. And we're like, oh, okay. And we buy into it every time. Right? We never find the sense of control that money promised. We just spent 2.5 years learning that one. It's part of what made COVID so painful, because we all felt like we had built lives where we were in control. And then we figured out one global pandemic would do a lot to upend our sense of control. And that's followed by inflation, recession, floods, supply chain issues, labor shortages, wildfires. These things that we thought were secure sometimes turn out not to be secure, and it freaks us out. Right? So in Matthew 6:19, Jesus says, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal more. Notice he's warning us in that verse that Mammon is going to constantly try to distract us with the relentless pursuit of more. This idea that if we could just store up a little more treasure, if we could just make a little more, save a little more, have a little more, find more profitable investments, if we could just find a little more, just a little more treasure, and we'll be good. And the problem is that relentless pursuit of more blinds us spiritually. It's not just that it doesn't work, it doesn't. But I'm not even sure you need the Bible to tell you that. You just need life experience to tell you that that blind pursuit of more never works. But the problem is that pursuit of more blinds us to spiritual things. Verse 22 and 23, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? These two verses confuse almost everybody who's ever studied the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus throws us a little bit of a curveball here where he's talking about money, and he's going to talk about money in verse 24, but he does this little tangent in verse 22 and 23 where he's talking about eyes and bodies and all of that. And he seems to be saying that when you're able to see clearly, you have a sense of purpose for how to use the rest of the limbs in your body is the best explanation I can give you, right? If you sort of see the door and decide you want to walk through that door, it gives you an overall orientation for like, okay, I'm going to have to walk in that direction. I'm going to have to open the door. I'm going to have to know what to do with myself in order to be able to make that happen. And he's saying, hey, if you get that, if you understand the significance of that eye, I want you to think about money in terms of the thing that's most likely to blind you, the thing that's most likely to keep you from seeing clearly in the world, because these things that Mammon offers, ease and control, are so appealing that it sounds like, how could I not want that? How could I not, for the sake of my family, give myself over to pursuing those things? And we'll end up maniacally focused on what we can never achieve, what we can never actually hold on to, and miss out on what God is actually inviting us into. And he says it's so subtle that if you're not actively fighting it, you're probably passively giving into it. So here's the question. As we start to wrap our time up, how do we break Mammon's power over our lives? Right? How do we get off this conveyor belt of just kind of the relentless pursuit of more? Jesus offers an answer on kind of two different levels. The primary answer he wants to offer is generosity. Matthew chapter 6, verse 20. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. Right? If you're serious about breaking the power of mammon over your life, there is literally nothing more effective than giving away your money. Right? Give it to God's work through the local church. Give it to God's work through parachurch organizations. Give it to support missionaries. Give it to feed starving children. Give it to advance causes that you believe in. But there is literally nothing that will break the power of mammon over our lives quite like giving our money away. Right? Every time we stand up here and say, hey, if you want to give, go to rcc.church/give, or there's a box in the back or whatever. We sometimes hear that as like a fundraiser for the church, or like a, hey, let's keep the lights on fund, or hey, let's, buy goldfish for the kids back there in kids ministry, or whatever. I would love it if all of us started to see that as an opportunity to liberate our souls from the stranglehold of mammon. It doesn't have to be the only way, but you say, hey, you know what? How do I fight back against this? I fight back through generosity. I fight back by intentionally saying no to the relentless pursuit of more. And Jesus promises that as we do that, it changes our heart. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He says that we can shift our hearts through how we spend our dollars. That we can break the power of mammon by choosing to invest in the life of generosity. But I would encourage us to take it one step further. Yes, give our money away. Yes, regularly, habitually, sacrificially fight back by giving it away. But I think there is also a tremendous benefit, and I would love to be a part of a community that is actively resisting the things that mammon uses to lure us in. Ease and control. And what if we said we wanted to be the kind of people That rather than looking for a life of ease, we were willing to look for a life that's challenging. What if we said, we're not afraid to do hard things? We're not afraid to do sacrificial things. We don't always want the easy way out because we're fighting for something bigger and different, and we want to offer our lives for the advancement of the kingdom of God. So we see that seasons of rest and seasons of vacation are a tremendous gift from God, but we don't want to live a life of ease. We're willing to embrace challenge for the sake of the gospel. We're trying to embrace, by the way, the kind of challenge that would then enable us to say, I'm rejecting a life of control and I'm embracing a life of dependence. Because I think those two things are very directly related, right? The reality for most of us in this room is that you know where dinner's coming from tonight. And you've got your food budget for the week, and nobody here is probably going to go hungry this week. And the vast majority of us in this room and the vast majority of us listening online know how you're going to pay your rent, pay your mortgage, right? The majority of people that go to this church are automatically having money deducted every month into a 401k and things like that are good. That are the things you're supposed to be doing. I'm not preaching against any of that. But sometimes in that world of direct deposit and insurance and retirement accounts and all that, we wonder, well, where does my sense of dependence come from? You know, where do I need to trust God? Like, well, first of all, get married and have kids. That'll solve a lot of the problem. But second of all, embrace a life of challenge. Embrace a life where you say, I'm only in D.C. for 2 years, but I want to figure out how much damage I can do for the sake of the kingdom of God in 24 months in the nation's capital. Where you say, you know what? I've been given this opportunity. I think I am the only follower of Jesus in my office. And it's so lonely and it's so hard, but it's also so strategic. Because most of the people that I work with have no intention of ever coming to church, no matter what the sermon series is, or you guys have food trucks out front, or whatever you do. They're just not coming because they're not interested. But God, in his wisdom, has put you in the middle of that group of people who have no interest in church. And you can say, look, my goal here is just to keep my head down, stay out of trouble, do a good job, maybe get a promotion, and I'm already thinking about the next transfer out of this place. Or you can say, man, I'm going to live these next 2 years as an ambassador of Jesus Christ in this office. And I know it's going to be hard. And I know it's going to cause me to have this real dependence on God, but I want to live my life that way. I want to reach my neighbors. And that means I'm going to have to pray for my neighbors by name. Or if I don't know their names, by their house number. Or like, hey, the blue one across the street. Maybe I should get to know them. And just be like, Jesus, I'm praying for them. And I'm offering myself to you and saying, if there is a way that you are working in their lives and you want to use me to introduce them to church, to the gospel, to the Bible, to you, to whatever, I'm here and I'm available. Right, so that when ease and control pop up, we've developed a little muscle memory to say, I get it, I understand the appeal, but I'm not going to get sucked all the way in. Because I'm not just looking for the easiest life out there. I'm not just looking for control. I'm willing to taste challenge. And I'm willing to taste dependence. Because I believe that's what a life of serving God looks like. And all of a sudden you say that and you're like, oh, that's what's at stake. It is. Do you see why so many of us then hear sermons like this? Why I'm going to fight it all week? Why I fight it all life long? To hear sermons like this and be like, of course I want to pick God. And he's like, great, it's going to be a life of challenge and dependence. And we're like, oh, well, what does money offer? Oh, ease and comfort. That sounds good after a tough Tuesday. Which is it going to be, God or mammon? You can't have both. Because here's the thing. Mammon will keep you relentlessly pursuing more. And always saying, you know what? At some point, I'm going to serve God. Right? One of the ways Laura and I have been thinking about this, and then I'm getting a little ahead because we haven't gone too far down this road yet. But it wasn't all that long ago, a couple of summers ago, that we didn't really do much for ourselves at all. We had small kids, didn't really go on a vacation. We went to visit family, and most of us have figured out that trip to see family and vacation are not at all related to each other at all. You all are too nervous to laugh at that. You know it's true, but you're afraid like your mom is watching or something. Well, my mom maybe is watching, and I do love you, Mom. But a trip to family and a vacation are radically different things. So we had a summer with small kids and a trip to see family. And we were like, man, we need to do better. Next summer, we're taking a vacation, just us. And we were like, yes. And we took a vacation. We got away for 3 nights, and it was awesome. It was great. But it didn't quite do everything that we needed it to do. Right? I didn't come back with like the full zest for life and zeal for the gospel that I thought I should have. So I was like, you know what? 3 nights isn't enough. Right? It's not enough. That's not a vacation. It's a long weekend. So we're going to go away for 5 nights. And then 5 nights is good, and it's better than 3, but it doesn't quite get it done. So then you're like, well, you know what? Okay, so here's our problem. We just need to go for a week. We'll just go away for 7 whole days, just ourselves. But then you realize, wait, 7 days staying in a small condo with 3 small kids? No, that's not. So you know what? Now let's just make it our ambition. Let's Airbnb a house next year. Yeah, if we do that, this will work. I'm saying, like, we haven't gone this far down the road, but you can see the logic, right? Well, we need to Airbnb a house. Oh, but we Airbnb'd a house on the sound side of the ocean, the low rent district. And it didn't quite do it for us. So next year, let's make sure we get a full house on the ocean side. But then that doesn't work. And you're like, you know why? It's because of the drive. It's the drive there, and then it's the drive back. Right? Because you go to the Outer Banks and you can have 7 days of sun and fun and let's build sandcastles and swim with the dolphins. And then you drive 7 hours back on 95. And by about Williamsburg, you don't know when it happened, but it feels like Satan got in the car at some point. And you're like, I don't know where we got him. Probably at Sheetz with the crummy coffee. But he's in the car right now. And these people that I was all like, ooh, let's go swimming. I'm like, really? Maybe we should vacation separately. Right? And you're like, okay, so what if we fly? Yeah, we'll fly. We'll go West Coast. No, what if we fly? What if we go all-inclusive resort? What if? And do you see, you can spend 10 years of your life chasing that. You could have taken your vacation budget from $0 to $12,000, and it's still not getting it done. And Mammon's like, I know. But next year, you need to rent the house oceanside with a pool and a hot tub. That's what you need. And we're like, yeah, okay, that'll probably work. And it never does. But we always look for more. Right? I am all for vacation. I hope you've gotten some time off this summer. But we need to think carefully about the ways that we're just giving in to this narrative of our culture that says more and more and more. And every once in a while, you're going to have to figure out your version of this. Every once in a while, it would do us a lot of good to, number one, resist the constant temptation to upgrade. You're like, oh, so you're saying I can rent the house at the ocean without the pool? I'm like, sure. Or every once in a while, you could say, for the sake of the gospel, instead of renting the house on the ocean, we're intentionally going back on the sound side, and we're just going to give away the difference. Because at the end of the day, we think that's going to bring us more joy. We're going to trim some money off the vacation budget. We're going to trim some money off the renovation budget. We're going to trim some money off the car budget. We're going to trim some money off the budget and see what joy we find in giving that away to families that truly are praying, give us this day our daily bread, and don't know where it's coming. And just see if God doesn't meet you in that moment of sacrifice. If God doesn't meet you in that moment of trust and give you more joy than you ever thought possible. Now look, we're all going to have to work this out. Vacations, houses, cars, whatever this looks like for you. But if you're not actively finding some way to fight back against Mammon, you're probably being swept along by the tide, and that tide does not lead you to the foot of the cross. It doesn't. It'll lead you farther and farther from the thing you were made for, dependence and intimacy with God. So, Father in heaven, I just want to ask for your help. God, we need you to guide us in an understanding of what this looks like in each of our lives. Because God, your word does invite us to save up for the future. Your word invites us to enjoy the good gifts that you've given us. And there's something wrong with our view of you if we feel guilty about the things we have or feel guilty about our income. That's not your goal. But God, would you speak to us this week about the ways that you want us to steward the resources you've given us? Would you show us if we've put too much of our trust in storing up treasure here on earth? Would you inspire us, not guilt us, but inspire us with a vision of what it would look like for us as individuals to store up treasure in heaven? God, would you help us to resist ease and control and embrace challenge and dependence? God, just give us what we need to live for you. We pray in Jesus' name.